Hi all, and thanks for coming to these talks. My talks today is about the composition pattern and more specifically how you can improve your code quality with this famous pattern. Just a few words about this pattern, but this pattern comes from Vue.js ecosystem. When the composition API was launched, the goal of this composition API was, just break something, some piece of code together to make a beautiful UI. But under the hood, the goal was to remove the mixing patterns. Okay, and I'm sure you already know that, but mixing pattern is not a recommendation by the Angular team for Angular frameworks or Angular ecosystems, right? So just a few words. I'm Nicolas Frizzarin. I'm working as a senior staff engineer and developer advocate at Sphere. And I'm one of the members of the NJ0 team. It's a UI components library. It's like Angular material, but we didn't follow the same spec of Angular material. We follow the design specs, and Angular material follows the material specs. So if you have some question about this library or some difficulties to implement it, or maybe, I don't know, you can ask me just after the talk. So what is composition pattern? The first time I heard this pattern or this word, I said to me, what this means for me, it's like, like Lego. We put together some Lego and finally you build a famous Harry Potter castle or something like this. And honestly, it's exactly the same in IT development or code development. So composition pattern is like building complex behavior by assembling smaller focus object or function together, rather than using the inheritance or the extending class, because they have a lot of problems with inheriting, to be honest. So just imagine when you want to use inheritance. Maybe you have a class that extends another class, that extends another class, that extends another class, and a lot of things like that. You create a big hierarchy first, and the coupling between the class is very strong. Okay, so when you have an issue, first it's quite complicated to know where is the issue, and finally, when you fix the issue, sometimes you have a lot of repercussion inside the whole code base. Finally, and compositions lets you pick just some small behavior at runtime or maybe at build times. Angular has both runtime and build time. And this will avoid deep hierarchy or avoid, some issue in your code when you refactor. And guess what? What is amazing currently, you use the composition pattern every day when you bootstrap your application in Angular. So if you take just this piece of code, you bootstrap your application in an app component. This app component is a standalone component, okay? And you give an array of providers. These providers are for the root environment injection, okay? So you provide router, and just after that, with hash location. So at this moment, you configure your routing to remove the push state location strategy to use the hash location strategy, right? And it's exactly the same for the provide HTTP clients. I know in Angular 21, this will be removed because the HTTP client will be totally integrated in the core of Angular. But if you want to parameterize or configure your HTTP client, you need to provide HTTP clients with some feature helpers like with fetch if you want to use the fetch API, or with interceptors if you add some interceptors in your code base. And this is also just possible since V14 of Angular. Okay, so when this version appears, everybody was so excited about standalone components. That's right, everybody speak about standalone components, but this version unlock a lot of things finally. First, standalone components, that's true. Okay, no more modules, and that's awesome because we join the whole ecosystem of web, like React or Vue. In Vue and React, we have no module. You can use your components like this. But what is very important also, it's the injection function, right? You can use now inject function outside an injection content, and this will unlock finally a lot of things and unlock the composition pattern, okay? Why? Because first, it unlocks guard and interceptors as a function. Why? Before, we use class-based interceptors and guards just to inject our custom providers, right? Just for that, just to have an injection context. But now it's not needed anymore. So you can just write a function and it will work for the interceptors and function. And thanks to the injection function working outside injection token context, you can create composition by injection. Okay, so here's an example, right? So I'm sure you already know that, but when you want to retrieve some params of routing, each time you inject the activated route, then you get the param map, and after that, you map to get just the params you want, right? And it's always the same logic. If you are in the components of to-do/id or user/id, it's always the same logic. So why we can't reuse this kind of logic? Okay, so I know you can use with component input banding and then get the params, but if you have a lot of params, or maybe you want the power of RxJS operator like to debounce or something like that, you need to inject the activated route param and pass with observable. But yeah, this function is very important because you can now compose by injection. So this is an example, but if you can also use this kind of example to maybe if you are in a V14, V16, you can this to create the take until destroy operator like Angular now. Okay, just you inject the destroy ref, and in the destroy ref you can use a callback and it works. Okay, so you can do that also. Also, another examples, it could be, when you want to send data to the servers, sometimes you need to have helpers, maybe to format correctly the data. You can also use inject. You can also compose by injection. This works too. So now let's go to standalone components. Directive, it's a word without modules, okay? And the composition is clearer by declaring dependency at the component level, okay? Finally, we don't think like that because it's normal to import our components, right? But finally, this is composition, okay? You compose your view by using some shared components, okay? And standalone directive open the birth of host directive. And this is very important because host directive could help you to create, to compose your UI at build time, finally. So, host directive is one of the solutions to create app composition, as I said, and there is two app compositions. The first one is the UI composition. It's directive for UI, okay, only for that. And you have business composition. This is directive for business. Okay, so just imagine when you create a button, right? You have a float button and sometimes you have a base button, okay? And before host directive, the float button extends the base button. When you do that, you have a build error when you build the library because generally it said, hey, your base button is not a directive. So you must extend a directive to create your own one. And finally, this makes no sense because the base button is just a class, is not a directive. This kind of class don't need to have a selector to call it, right? So host directive could help to do that. So how it works? So I create here a directive base button, which take two inputs. The first one is totally required, it's the size, and the second one is not required because we have a default value, right? And this directive needs to be standalone. It's one requirement and it's the only one, okay? And I create another directive, which is also standalone, right? And this float button directive will extend the base buttons simply by having a host directive. So to declare a host directive, it's an array, just an array of host directive, or an array of token or an array of object describing which directive is extending and also the inputs you want to expose. Okay, that is very important. So here I expose the size, but I also expose the type. So when I will use the float button, I will I can pass to this directive the size and the type of inputs, right? And at this moment, the size and the type will also pass to the base button, and the logic could be done on the base button. That's important. But now imagine I don't want to pass the type, so I don't need to declare it here. Okay, it's not necessary, and you can have exactly the same with the outputs. Okay, if you want to expose some outputs, just create an array of outputs and expose the outputs. So as directive is easy to retrieve thanks to viewChild signal function. So if you use float button inside your component, your view, you can retrieve the base buttons thanks to viewChild. It's possible, okay? Because finally, in the DOM, you will have the float button, and on the float button, you will have the base button directive. Okay, so it's possible to retrieve the base button logic thanks to the viewChild signal function. This is a kind of directive. So this is business composition, right? So what is business composition? Just imagine you want to connect an application with auth ID. The main goal with auth ID is a refresh token, right? And this is the big part of auth ID, and it's quite complicated to manage. And generally, when I read some code, what I see is like all the logic of refresh token is done inside a provider, but it's not correct, or inside your app components. Okay, and this makes no sense because the app components is just present to display the routing or some interaction of the user, but not the whole logic of token refresh, right? So token refresh needs to be done in a directive, and this directive is not present to enrich the DOM, okay? It's not here to enrich your HTML or your logic, okay? Just here to make some side business logic. Okay, and for that, you can create a directive, okay? So here, if you want to make your logic of refresh, you can make it in the after next render hook. It's not a problem, okay? And this is perfect because it will work also on server-side rendering. But yeah, when you have done your logic of refresh, you can just have to declare the token refresh directive in your host directive or in your app components, and it worked out of the box. Okay, you don't need to invoke the directive inside your templates. Okay, so this is quite perfect. I can show you if you want an example of doing that. It's like a library. If you are interested, I can show you. And it's here. So yeah, this is the kind of library you can do. Okay, so okay, I made it in the NG on init, but yeah. So I inject my auth service, my auth storage. I also inject my auth user service, my distro ref, and this is all the logic I do for my refresh. Okay. And this is done. When I do that, the only things I made in my application is it's called my directive here, and it's worked. So if I go to my template, I don't invoke my directive authenticated. Okay. So at this moment, it will work. Is it clear for everybody? Yeah. Nice. So thanks to UI directive and business directive, no more mixin. That's awesome. Okay. So the only library you can see mixin now it's in Angular material. If you read the code, you can see that there are a lot of mixins. Okay. And no more spaghetti extended class. That's nice. Okay. Because when you have an issue, it's quite complicated to debug it. Okay. So thanks to directive composition, we can build UI at build time. Okay, only at build time. So currently we can compose your UI. That's true, but at build time, and it's not enough for our needs nowadays. Okay, nowadays we want to build our library or UI view at runtime. Maybe when you click on something, or I don't know, right? So and why it's directive composition. It can't work at runtime because the composition is made on the decorator, okay, and decorator is a function, so class is built before the function. So yeah, that's why it's complicated to have some signals inside your components, and yeah, with this kind of signals you can just choose if you apply this directive or another one. So it's not possible, or it's very complicated. And thanks to Angular 20, maybe it's possible to build UI at runtime. Okay, and this is possible thanks to the create component API. Okay, there is a lot of things inside this API. Okay, now you can do a lot of things, and we will see what we can do now. So first, you can bind input and output dynamically. Okay, it's just input binding, output binding, and it's just a function. Okay, you can also add directive dynamically. Okay, so now when you click on a button, maybe you can choose if a user is admin, apply this kind of directive, or if a user is maybe a guest, you apply this kind of directive. Okay, what is very important is you can bind input and also output to the host directive. Okay, so thanks to that, you have a huge granularity of your of building your UI, to be honest. And finally, what is very awesome is you can do all of this at runtime. Okay. So this is kind of example. So when I click, imagine in my app.html file, I click on a button and I load my components. Okay, so I will display a hello components. And so I create my hello components and I will bind a name. This is Angular, okay? So in my hello components, I have an input signal called name. I will also bind an output, refresh name, okay? So when my hello components emits the refresh name, event emitter, the onRefresh function is called. Okay, and I will bind to this hello components a specific directive. And if my user is admin, okay, I will bind my admin directive. And if my user is not an admin people, I will bind my user directive, right? Okay, so and in this directive, I have a name. Okay, an input signal name, and I bind this input with the this.name signals. Okay, why I didn't create a function? Because I just give it the signals, don't evoke it, so it's like a function, right? So now, thanks to that, we can build your UI at runtime. When you want, you can lazy load easily the things. Okay, maybe here it's not optimized. That's true because I import the admin directive and I import the user directive. That's true, but maybe I can just optimize it and lazy load my admin directive and my user directive in function of if my user is admin or not. Okay. So yeah, the only things which is quite complicated is that the admin directive and user directive, if you compose like that, must have the same input. Okay. In my examples. Okay, but what you can do is also parameterize your bindings. Okay, just JavaScript here. So with this approach, you can compose your UI at runtime with infinite possibilities. You can have a maximum of performance by lazy loading all your directives you want to compose, etc. And of course, you can also have input and output binding, which is very convenient when you want to create dynamic components and dynamic directive. Okay, so I don't want to say composition pattern is always the best things to do. Okay, there is other patterns. So first, when using composition, when you want flexible combination of behavior, okay, this is the first rules. Then when you need to avoid base class spaghetti, okay, this normally it's you want that's every time normally. And when you want something easy to test and a high reuse of capabilities, okay? Because when you have some spaghetti class extend inheritance, it's so complicated to test the whole hierarchy of extend class. And finally, when you expect requirements to change and you don't want to refactor all the class tree. Okay, so composition pattern helps you to have a huge application that is very scalable in terms of requirements. Okay, because it's just some function you put it together to build something big. And just a composition reminder. So create composable unit function thanks to the inject function first. Okay. Avoid if you want, you can, if you think you can just unit create functions that make a specific job, it's better to make two functions just instead just one, finally. Keep in mind that it's a good idea to split host UI directive and host business directive. It's not the same goal. If you want to create dynamically your view, use the create component API, yes. Finally, if you have some requirements to change things, to use the composition patterns. And thanks for listening. And if you have some question, you can ask it. Okay, let's sometimes to do that.